Skugdash Bushit Chamoy Sapandakamnianyanap Chugig, Precious Vicente. Good day, everybody. My name is Precious Vicente. I'm 23 years old and I reside within the Gila River Indian community located in southern Arizona. This is where my family and community has been for generations, even before the establishment of reservation borders. The nearby city of Phoenix is the ancestral lands of the Akimaratam. The land which we now call Mexico is the ancestral lands of the Tono and Hiachiratam. I would also like to give land recognition to the Nacotchtank and Piscataway nations, as we are currently on their ancestral lands here in Washington, D.C. The world of conservation is one that I never thought I'd be pursuing a career in. After I graduated high school in 2017, I spent time at Northern Arizona University, where I was studying criminal justice and American Indian studies. But college wasn't a priority for me. Like many other young people, college was pushed on me as the natural next steps in life. But once I got there, I realized it wasn't for me, so I dropped out. After I withdrew, I spent the next several years working odd jobs. I worked as a bartender, as casino security, and as a FedEx warehouse worker, where I was unloading trucks in 120-degree heat. There was also a point in time where I was unemployed and left to look after my siblings. I was content with this lifestyle, though, because it gave me time to participate in cultural gatherings within my own community. My O'odham history and culture is what I am passionate about, and being with people from my community is what brought joy to my life. Still, I wasn't seeing progression in my professional life. I felt like I was at a loss. That is until I was scrolling on Facebook and saw a flyer posted by American Conservation Experience. They were looking for historic preservation interns to work at Casa Grande Ruins National Monument. And as part of the Indian Youth Service Corps, they were recruiting specifically for applicants who were Indigenous. The post caught my eye because Casa Grande Ruins is right in my own backyard. I can literally see it from my house. This site also has important cultural significance to my community, and that instantly drew me to apply for this position. I went through a competitive interview process and was ultimately offered the position along with Masai Leon, who was Chiricahua Apache. Sivanvaki is the true name for Casa Grande Ruins. This prehistoric structure was built in 1350 CE, and this is where our ancestors, the Huugam, once lived in a thriving community. This is the place where we produced and utilized Pima cotton to create textiles and dug 200 miles of extensive canals to feed our crops. How many of us here today are wearing clothes made from cotton? How many of us here often eat crops grown in the Southwest? Another thing that most people don't know is that the major canals that run throughout the city of Phoenix are actually built on top of the prehistoric ones that my people built. This is a point I like to emphasize when talking with visitors about Casa Grande. Our ancestors did not just survive, they thrived. And we can still see the significance of their work echoing in the world today. This position was one of the first of its kind through the Indian Youth Service Corps, which was established by the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland. The purpose of the Indian Youth Service Corps is to provide meaningful education, employment, and training opportunities to Indigenous youth through conservation projects on public and Indigenous land. Just by being here today, I am living proof that the Indian Youth Service Corps has fulfilled its mission. With the help of the Indian Youth Service Corps and Traditional Trades Advancement Program, I was able to learn and connect with my ancestral lands, partake in lead trainings for staff, and finally become a National Park Service Ranger. I am truly honored to be an inaugural participant in the Indian Youth Service Corps program, which fostered my now deep passion for conservation, as well as opened up doorways for success. Without this experience, I wouldn't be here talking with you today. On the other hand, there is a lingering sadness, and that is because it took too long for Indigenous people to be included in these conversations. Not long ago, there were policies being enacted to exterminate us. In 1819, the Indian Civilization Act was introduced, and the United States enacted laws and implemented policies establishing and supporting Indian boarding schools across the country. The purpose of Indian boarding schools was to culturally assimilate indigenous children by forcibly removing them from their families and communities to distant residential facilities where their American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian identities, languages, and beliefs were to be forcibly suppressed. Think of your own kids, nieces, nephews, and grandchildren. Now imagine them being ripped away from you at any moment. Your kids are no longer your own, but are property of the US government. You have no communication with them. You don't even know if they're alive because there's a heavy chance that disease or abuse took them. If your children were lucky enough to survive these horrific events, they were then sold to work for other families. For over 150 years, hundreds of thousands of indigenous children were taken from their communities. This was an act overseen by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In 1930, President Calvin Coolidge and Secretary of the Interior, Hubert worked together to construct the Coolidge Dam to cut off the once free-flowing Gila River that runs through my ancestral lands. When people ask me what conservation means, I think of my home. I think of our Akimarathan people who are so dependent on this river, and to have it all stripped away from them within a span of only a few years. Our land was filled with so much agriculture and vegetation. We didn't call it a desert, but we called it a paradise. We were able to sufficiently sustain ourselves with canals to feed our fields. We grew and ate the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash. Once this water was cut off to our people, our three sisters turned into lard, flour, and sugar. Once this water died, so did our people. Indigenous people today suffer generational trauma as a direct result of these laws and policies. It's prevalent within our own communities, and it presents itself in the form of poverty, health disparities, and drug and alcohol abuse. However, I believe conservation has a key role in fighting against that trauma. We have a soul-tying connection to the land, and we're not called to only be stewards, but to be relatives of the earth and protect her by any means necessary. As an interpretive ranger, my job is to educate visitors and hopefully help them create an emotional connection with our site. When interacting with the public, it's clear that many are only taught one side of history. Many of the schools in our country failed to acknowledge that we are still here. Many people I interact with have never talked with or even met a Native person. They blatantly stereotype me based on my skin and facial features and ask me questions like if I'm a real Indian. Working in the National Park Service, there have been several times where I was uncomfortable presenting myself as a Native person. There were times when I didn't want to talk to anyone because I knew that if I walked out of my office, my high cheekbones, my long black hair, and my dark skin were going to be the first to be pointed out. And this is not just visitors of the park. These interactions happen with my peers, my coworkers, and federal partners. But times are changing right before our very eyes, and it's still exciting to be an Indigenous woman in this day and age. The Department of Interior and the National Park Service are now being overseen by Indigenous leaders, the same people our government was once actively trying to exterminate. When I see Secretary Deb Haaland, I see someone who looks like me. When I see Park Service Director Chuck Sams, I see someone who looks like me. When Indigenous crews come to my park, they see me and see a representation of themselves. This is why diversity is important in workspaces, and we must all push for a more inclusive workforce. I hope that as I'm giving this speech, other Indigenous youth see me and know that they can accomplish anything. I am proud to be here representing the Gila River Indian community. Without the resiliency of my ancestors from the past, I wouldn't be here today. When I think of conservation, I don't only think about the protection of resources, I think about the protection of people. I'm addressing this to the leaders and directors of the many conservation corporations represented here today. What are you doing that promotes diversity in your organization? How many of you are actively pushing for programs like the Indian Youth Service Corps? I am honored to be recognized with the title Corpsmember of the Year, along with 4 of my peers, who are all outstanding individuals, and the resiliency that they uphold is something that we can all learn from. I hope that the words I have shared with you are some that you can take back to your organizations and help implement change. I am not a spokesperson for all Indigenous people, but I will take every opportunity to advocate for Native people to work in and be a part of these spaces. The ultimate goal here is to see more Indigenous people up on the stage, accepting this award, and being advocates for the other 574 Native nations across this land. I also just have a list of people who I want to thank just for the development of my own personal growth and people who've helped me along the way. First off, being Deb Holland and also Chuck Sams. And the Historic Preservation Training Center, Moss Rudley, Kyle Rommel, and Claire Finn. And then also my coworkers at Casa Grande Ruins, Alicia Hayes, Ben Littlefield, Sarah Sutton, Dave Carney, and Pam Tripp. I also just want to thank American Conservation Experience and Conservation Legacy. And then also Bianca Wakini. She's been awesome helping me throughout this entire conference and throughout my internships too. So thank you, everybody.